Hi everyone, this is Chem Interview. Here we usually talk with the most prominent and influential representatives of chemical science and industry. Our today's guest is Dr. Dietmar Martin from the Gene Center and Department of Biochemistry at the Ludwig-Maximilians-Universität in Munich. Dr. Martin, could you briefly tell us what do you do as a biochemist at the Gene Center?
My name is Dietmar Martin. I'm since 2008 a lecturer for biochemistry at LMU Munich, Department of Biochemistry. I'm in a lab working on immune biology, basically, teaching courses, practical courses. I'm supervising PhD students and master students in the subject of biochemistry, from basic biochemistry to modern genetics. And I used to work mainly on gene transcription, and now I'm more into signal transduction in immune biology. That's what I'm currently doing. Yeah, I'm teaching at the bachelor level, so we have approximately 200 bachelor students each year studying chemistry and biochemistry, and then they can specialize between chemistry and biochemistry. And we are currently having something like 50 students in the master program biochemistry at our faculty. Yeah.
Would you kindly tell us where you studied and how you found yourself in chemistry? Why did you choose exactly biochemistry and not any other field? What was your inspiration?
Actually, when I studied in Marburg in Germany, Marburg an der Lahn, and I did my PhD also there. And I started out research area on microbiology and ecology. So I got to know more about microorganisms. And the professors I had, they were experts in the biochemistry of such microbes. So they studied their metabolism in very detail. And I was fascinated by these microorganisms and how they shape how they shape nature and the atmosphere. And then I focused on microbiology with a focus on biochemistry. So I studied bacteria, which are symbiotic bacteria inside of the roots of plants and provide the plants with nutrients. And then as a postdoc, I went to Basel, Switzerland, and I studied nutrients and their impact on fungi, unicellular eukaryotes. This is a more complex field. And if you're studying then signal transduction in eukaryotes, you somehow always end up in cancer, some other disease mechanisms. And but I still stayed with basic science and came to Munich in 2008, and we studied gene transcription in Baker's yeast mainly.
Why is it important to study biochemistry even you would rather study just general chemistry?
What we are teaching are the basics in protein chemistry. So we are teaching about the structure and function of proteins, structure and function of DNA and RNA molecules, nucleic acids, and all the other macromolecules inside of living cells, but far beyond of normal chemistry. So we are really looking how, for example, the novel mRNA vaccines are designed and produced, or we're looking at antibody therapies, how they are done in cancer treatment, for example, or the modern gene technology techniques like CRISPR-Cas, for example. So the students are also doing this in practical courses.
When I was doing my undergrad studies at LMU, we had very different people in your lectures. There were biologists, there were some medicine and pharmacology students too. Do they also need to study biochemistry?
The students which study pharmacy and those who study biology, they have a different curriculum. They have more specialized courses directed towards more, for example, plant biology, pharmacology. But I think biochemistry is a good foundation also for many fields of biology nowadays. Even things like subjects like ecology or anthropology rely on biochemistry. So many people working in anthropology, they're doing gene sequencing of fossils and things like that. And also people in ecology start to study DNA from samples. And therefore, I think a good foundation in biochemistry is good for the student. Mm-hmm.
Could you perhaps name the 5 most important research areas that biochemistry is now focused on?
Maybe, I mean, the Nobel Prize in 2020 was awarded to two investigators, Jennifer Doudna and Emmanuel Charpentier. They're working on gene editing with the CRISPR-Cas system. And I guess this will be the most influencing technique in the coming decades, I guess. Yeah. So you can really manipulate the genome of all cell types, and that you can culture. And this gives, this is of course not only a positive development, it also raises ethical questions which have to be answered. You may have noticed that there has been an experiment, or the experiment has been done where a Chinese researcher cloned babies which were genetically modified and identical copies. They harbored a modified gene conferring resistance to HIV virus. And this was, of course, against all rules, all international standard rules, but still scientists managed to do such experiments. And of course, the society has to think about that and has to decide what can be done and should be done, and what should be kept in check, for example. So this is one technology. Of course, gene editing will be important. I guess antibody therapy against many different diseases is something that is of great importance. So people start to design novel antibodies, chimeric antibodies, which can target specific receptors on tumor cells. And on the other side of the molecule, they are covalently linked to some toxins or some effector domains which kill a cancer cell or a virus-infected cell. Of course, what we now see in the pandemic, in the corona pandemic, is therapies against viruses, for example. Yeah, so vaccination with RNA molecules is, of course, very powerful, since you can design your RNA vaccine just for the need of the special strain, which is currently pandemic. And this is very powerful, of course. Yeah.
For me, biochemistry and all you have told us sounds like a really global field, in the sense that the current tasks of biochemistry are indeed global missions of the whole mankind. And I suppose that those questions are so big that they demand some international dimension. So that's why I want to ask you, how important is it actually to have international experience in today's science? To study at different universities, to work at different labs, to work in different countries?
Well, we in our department encourage the students to go abroad for a couple of months, or 6 months, half a year. Quite a few of them, they do their master thesis abroad, most of them in the United States, but some also in the United Kingdom or other European countries. On the other hand, we also frequently get students from other countries, from Europe mainly, doing a master thesis here. And in our master program, actually, biochemistry, we have almost 50% of international students coming from all over the world. So there is an exchange, also a cultural exchange of different nations on the level of the master program. In the bachelor program, in the first 3 years, we don't have many international students, I have to say. It's taught in German, these 3 years, the bachelor courses. So it's a little bit hard for foreigners, but still we have people from other countries. Yeah, they they are tough and they learn German.
These are the real heroes. And what is also interesting, are there really different schools of teaching? For example, in Europe, in America, in China?
The elite universities in China are probably the toughest in the world, as far as I know. So they have very strict rules, and long laboratory hours and such things. This is probably tougher than our curriculum, but still our students have to do a lot. And when we send our students to other countries for their master's thesis or for PhD, we get the feedback that they are very well trained. So they had a lot of practical courses when they finish their master program. And I think this is more than the average, more than the US, than in the US, for example, yeah. And also more than in the UK. And myself, I have been a student, exchange student in Oxford, and I've seen that the students there not have such an experience, such an experimental experience as at my university. And we have now, since a couple of years, as you know, a bachelor and a master program. And since we have that, I think in Europe, the curricula are a little bit more similar than they have been before. We switched to bachelor and master, which is good for the students if they want to move from one country to the other or from one university to another. But it makes the curriculum a little bit strict and not so flexible as in former times. So the students cannot choose between different subjects. Most of the subjects are given and are mandatory. So this was different in previous time.
So you were talking about the topics of research. It's also an interesting question. What are the occupations one can take after graduating in biochemistry? Of course, it can be academic career, but can it be also something beyond science?
Maybe starting with the scientific aspect. So actually most of our master students also do a PhD, either here in Munich or in another city, sometimes also abroad in other countries. So a PhD is very useful in the field of biochemistry. So only a few students, they get a job with the master degree. Most of them want to do a PhD because they know the chances are better, no matter what you want to do afterwards. What you can do is, for example, you can just move to Martinsried, which is just 2 kilometers away from our institute. And there are a bunch of biotechnology companies, and they're always looking for young people. And they're looking for lab heads or lab scientists. So either you're really head of a team already, if you're a bit more advanced, and maybe you have a short postdoc already, then you can be a lab head with, let's say, 5 people working on a certain topic, for example, working on an antibody therapy. So they design and manufacture antibodies made in eukaryotic human cells, and then they process these antibodies and try to make a therapeutic agent. Or you stay as a scientist in such a company. Usually if you go to a bigger company like Roche or Novartis or other companies, you won't be a lab head at the beginning. You start as a scientist and do more or less similar things that you have been done as a postdoc or PhD before. You can do also journalism, science journalism, for example, working for a newspaper, a journal, or be an editor of a journal. This is also something you can do. So journals like EMBO Journal, for example, or all the Nature journals, they have a huge editorial press, and there are many different editors. around, specialized for specific areas of research. So this is also something you can do. Some become teachers, some become lecturers at other universities, some stay in academia and do a long postdoc and try to become an independent investigator and try to become a professor after a while. I guess it's half the people stay in science, I would say, and half the people, they go to economics or journalism or law. Yeah. So when I did my studies, I was very insecure because society didn't need a lot of biologists and biochemists, but nowadays things changed. Yeah, nowadays we need people knowing how molecules are formed and cells behave.